And go.
All right. All right, everyone. Welcome to our Pinot Noir tasting. We're gonna start here in just 1 second. But one thing is that please make sure you're in live mode on Microsoft Teams. So this works out here. All right, great. Okay. Okay, so today what we're going to do is we're going to go through and talk through a bunch of different things about Pinot Noir. So exciting tasting that we're going to be talking about an overview about Pinot Noir clonal selections, Pinot Noir vineyard characteristics, winemaking techniques, learnings for tasting Pinot Noir, and wine tastings, and then actually doing the wine tasting, and then we're going to get to questions. So, all right. These are the wines that we're tasting today. So please, if you have them, that'd be great. You can line them up in this order on this tasting sheet. What we're going to do is we're going to go through each one and we're going to talk about how they differ from other wines in the tasting. One thing we want to make sure is that you can go ahead and start drinking now if you want. Feel free to open the wines because, hey, I know this is a Microsoft Teams event, but it doesn't have to feel like work. And we're going to be tasting some really interesting wines today. So have at it now, so you can kind of think of through how they taste when we get to the pieces of actually analyzing the wines. All right. So Pinot Noir. So Pinot Noir is a thin-skinned grape varietal. And so it's a red wine, but it's almost a little bit more like a white wine in that sense that it doesn't have a tremendous thickness on the skins like Cabernet or Syrah. So what you find is that actually in reality it's the same grape varietal as Pinot Gris and Pinot Blanc, which sounds kind of strange, but we're going to talk about clones and how that is related, and how Pinot Noir is related to Pinot Gris and Pinot Blanc. It's also a cousin of the Chardonnay grape. So oftentimes you see the two of them put in the same place. So grown in the same area. If you think about Burgundy, the wines are close to each other, almost in the same region in a lot of cases, or actually in the same vineyard, neighboring vineyards. If you think about it, California, you have areas like Carneros that grow both Pinot Noir and Chardonnay, and you have areas in across the rest of the world like New Zealand or Australia where regions are known for basically their Pinot production and their Chardonnay production. This has really helped, kind of a lot of wineries, right? So that they can create a world-class Chardonnay and they can create a world-class Pinot Noir and kind of be known for what we're going to talk about, which is Burgundy varietals, right? And the price range for Pinot Noir is pretty variable. Now, you have some of the most famous wines in the world that are made from Pinot Noir. So DRC, you have, Clos de la Roche, you have all these like incredible Burgundies that are super expensive. You have, amazing California wines that are sea smoke, wines like sea smoke on the Central Coast, or, Arista in Sonoma County. And you also have some more value-oriented Pinot Noirs, and we're going to taste a couple great ones today. One challenge is that Pinot Noir, being a thin-skinned grape varietal, makes it more challenging to actually produce. So you don't see as much inexpensive Pinot. It's not a prolific producer like Cabernet or even Chardonnay, and so tends to be a little bit more expensive. So if you're wondering why am I always paying more for Pinot than I am for other grapes, that's one of the reasons. And then, I already talked about kind of the regions where it's grown, and the one thing is that Riesling has a kind of an ability to show sense of place, and that's kind of the maybe the white wine that has that true sense of place for a white. But for red wines, Pinot Noir is probably the sense of place grape varietal. And what does that mean? That's kind of a weird thing to say. Well, it tends to taste similar from areas like when you split out the vineyard sites in Burgundy. If you're a really good taster, you can tell the difference between Bolnay and Pommard, even though they are neighboring region, or actually appellations. They're within a kilometer of each other. The wines taste different. And so, you know, that's a unique thing to Pinot Noir. I mean, you could probably make that argument a little bit for Cabernet, but it's a little bit harder to tell the difference between Saint Julien and Pauillac, or Rutherford and Oakville, right? But Pinot Noir, it's like, okay, this is from this area and this is from this area, and they're right next to each other, and it's a lot easier to understand. So, you know, what drives the taste of Pinot Noir? And so we're going to talk about that so that we can understand when we're tasting the wine, why does it taste like it does? And so the first thing we're going to talk about is clone. And so I'll give you a second to read this beautiful statement from Jancis Robinson out of the Oxford Companion to Wine. She is a master of wine. I think the first female master of wine, and in the UK. And she wrote this great she writes the Oxford Companion to Wine. So if you're a true wine geek, it is probably the place for you to look. But really, a clonal selection is basically a version of the varietal. So Pinot Noir is the varietal itself, and then there's essentially subcategories of Pinot Noir, and that's really what you need to know. Those subcategories of Pinot Noir are actually very important. In other grape varietals, maybe the subcategories don't define the distinction nearly as much as they do in Pinot Noir. And I forgot to mention, you feel free to ask questions through this piece into the chat. My team's going to send me some chat messages, and we'll get to them, especially kind of right as we get to the end of right before we get to the tasting. And then you can ask through the tasting if you have questions. So I talked about that, about the clones, Attack of the Clones. Hopefully going to get sued by Lucas or Disney or whoever owns Star Wars these days. But there are 5 really kind of key clones in Pinot Noir. Now, there might be, if there's some real wine geeks on here, maybe there's 7 or 8. But these are the 5 that I tend to come across the most common. And so you might ask the question, okay, so what makes these clones important? And really, here's what you can see is that you have these different clones that provide different flavoring characteristics, and they kind of turn into a spice box. And so most producers of high quality Pinot use a bunch of these or a number of these together to create that complexity, aromatic complexity, and maybe some palate complexity too. So, you know, you have these Dijon clones, which are from Dijon is the big city in Burgundy. North of actually the Côte d'Or. And so you have, you know, 777, 667. This is bark cherry. I guess I was thinking of dogs instead of cherries. Red cherry, pomegranate. So that's supposed to be dark cherry. Sorry, dark cherry on the 667. The Dijon 115 is like a red cherry. Dijon 828 is more of a pomegranate, and you know, the Pommard clones, which 5 is the most common, and there's a couple of other ones, tend to show a little bit more earthiness. So mushrooms, you know, sometimes they'll show something like a forest floor. Oftentimes that's a case of the actual location, but you know, that's showing that character. But this is, you know, a good example. You know, a wine, Pommard itself, these clonal varietals are used as a way to come in to add a little bit of that earthy flavor to Pinot Noir, because, you know, if you really want to get the complexity out of Pinot Noir, sometimes you need to get a touch of that earthiness to it. So classic example, Pommard 5. So you've grown these clones, and then where do you plant the clones? And so Pinot Noir, being a thin-skinned grape varietal, it really needs a cool climate. So this is actually a picture of Willamette Valley in Oregon. You know, it's a pretty cool climate. It's not as cold as some other places they grow Pinot Noir, but pretty cool. And you know, the great thing about Oregon is they have, you know, these rolling hills, which is perfect for growing Pinot Noir, because you get it on a slope and you get a lot of great well draining soils. And you might say, well, why does the soil need to be well draining? Well, you really need low yields. And sometimes what happens with Pinot Noir is that if you get it on the valley floor, and your soils are too basically they're too fertile, then the vigor on the plant gets out of control, and so you get these really vigorous vines, and the vine puts all the effort in producing the leaves, and doesn't put any effort into producing the actual grapes. So you get these kind of just basically insipid wines that don't taste like much. So you need the vine to struggle. So that's why it's best on the mid slope. If you get too high on the slope and you're at the top, you might not have enough material in the soil to actually help the grape grow, the vine grow, and then the vine really struggles in the wrong way, and then you get not really interesting wines on the other side. So it's a very fickle grape. You can plant Cabernet and Syrah. I mean, many people argue that you can't just plant them anywhere in really fertile soil, but you have more flexibility with those grape varietals than you do with Pinot Noir for sure. So it's definitely one of those challenging grape varietals that requires that, and that's why it's also, again, we talked about thin-skinned. There's not a lot of ability to make inexpensive Pinot Noir, and a lot of that has to do with the fact that it's hard to find a location for it. And then the final piece to this is that you can't overproduce Pinot Noir. And what I mean that is that you can't have 8 tons per hectare or per acre or 12 tons per acre. It has to be kind of around that 4 tons per acre production amount, because if you go over, then you again get these insipid wines. And so all these pieces are working together. Why Pinot Noir is very expensive to produce. We have a number of different pieces here on where how region affects where the wine tastes. And really, so we talked about soil type, we talked about clones and all that, how that's important. And then finally you have the big overall region. So you have these kind of like warm climate flavors versus cool climate, and you have these heat indexes for Pinot Noir. And you have areas from Carneros to Baden, Pfalz in Germany that produce some really different flavors of wine. Okay, we also have flavors from the winery. So one of the things that happens is that you've gone through, you have these clonal selections, these regional differences, these big picture ideas. You have these big picture regions that you have, like I said, warm climate wines from Carneros or Napa, where the fruit gets really out there and aggressive, and then you have cooler climate like Burgundy, where the wine is a little bit more restrained and the fruit is not as forward. And you have a lot of stuff in between, like Yarra Valley or whatnot. But you can also influence some of those flavors in the winery. And so when you get to the winery here, what you can do is when you're making the wine, these are the things that can affect the wine production. So you have harvesting style. And what do I mean by harvesting style? I mean, are you hand picking the wines, or are you machine picking? Machine picking is getting much better these days, so that's becoming less and less important. Destemming or whole cluster. So what this means is that you can either take the grapes off the stem, or you can throw just the whole grapes and the stem into the actual production facility, into the tank. You can also do cold soaking, which doesn't necessarily always influence the flavor, but it does oftentimes influence the color of the wine. And that's really before you ferment the wine, you leave it in a cool temperature. So you use usually dry ice, and you keep that temperature so that the fermentation doesn't kick off. But 2 to 3 to 4 to 5 days, you just leave the wine soaking. It's actually grapes; they're not even wine yet, right? The Pinot Noir, also things like free run and pressed juice fermentation container, and we'll talk about a couple of these in the next couple slides. Co-brand has a nice, since I used one of their wines, I borrowed their fermentation techniques here. So go visit their website. They have a lot of great information on it. And this is kind of a visual representation of Pinot Noir and how it's produced. All right. And then, so I talked about things that are, create Pinot Noir styles. And these are probably the most important of all of the groups, right? So if we think about the things that really affect how Pinot Noir tastes, you've got, stem inclusion or not, which I talked about. So are you going to take the stems and leave them in the wine and ferment them, in the fermentation process, or are you going to remove them? Cold soaking, again, maybe more of whether the color of the wine or not. Fermentation vessel is very important, because Pinot Noir is a very thin-skinned grape varietal. And so if you decide to, pump over versus punch down, you're going to extract different things. So a punch down is going to be softer, a pump over is going to be a little more aggressive. So if you're trying to extract some tannins, maybe you're doing a pump over. If you're trying to keep the wine really delicate, you're doing a punch down. And then temperature control is a big part of this too. Like, how warm do you ferment this, this Pinot Noir? I mean, you can get Cabernet up to quite a bit of heat when you're fermenting and extract a lot of flavors, because as you take the temperature up, you extract more flavor, right? But, you have to question, or you have to think about it when you're producing Pinot. Do I want to get that warm? Maybe I don't want to create this wine that is, overly hot or that is really extracted in style. So that's the things you have to think about when you're fermenting the wine. These are the things you need to think about when you're, when you're aging the wine. So most Pinot Noir is let's say, it's hard to say exactly this because I don't want to say the wrong thing, because some people do ferment and tank. But let's just say that the higher end you go on the Pinot Noir stage is you really need to have some oak influence, and the reason for that is because Pinot Noir, it needs a little time to kind of round out the acidity and the tannins and everything that come along with it, because it tends to be a more acidic grape varietal. And so, what typically the higher end wines go into barrel. Now, there's been a lot of developments over the last 2 or 3 years, or actually maybe 5 or 6 years, around the aging of Pinot and tank using staves and some other techniques that are getting close to barrels, because barrels are really expensive. I mean, over $1,000 for French oak, and mainly use French or Hungarian oak on Pinot Noir. And then the other thing that you have to think about is how long are you aging that wine for? So are you aging it for 9 or 12 months? Are you aging it for longer? If you need to get the flavor from the oak and round out some of the tannins, but if you go too long, then you might dry out the wine, and drying out a Pinot Noir would be the worst thing ever, right? Because the freshness of a wine is really what that's, where the Pinot is driven from. So you have to think through all those things as you kind of, decide what you're going to do with Pinot Noir and how you're going to age it. All right, and then, really before we get into these wines, so hopefully you've learned something there, and what we're, as a kind of a recap, all the things that drive the taste of Pinot Noir, clonal selection, sense of place, winemaking, how delicate or not delicate are you going to make the Pinot Noir, kind of runs down this style situation. You have an earthy Pinot, you have a fruity Pinot. Are the tannins light or are they stronger? And what's the acidity like in the wine? And those are really the 4 things I think about when I'm thinking about Pinot Noir. So I think earth, fruit, tannins, acid, right? Pretty simple, put together, just to kind of, cover it off real quick. And then I also provided the Pinot Noir wheel. And so this is kind of, I put this together of all the things that I think through in my Master of Wine studies. And, when I was thinking about Pinot Noir, what are the things that Pinot Noir, what are the tastes that you get out of Pinot Noir? So we have, classically, red cherries is probably the most common, but there's, dark cherries obviously too. There are some blue fruits, plum, every once in a while. You get this, character of clone, which is pretty interesting. And then that earthiness, which is sometimes a great clonal characteristic, sometimes a vineyard characteristic. So the vineyard characteristics, you tend to get more of the earthiness. So the forest floor, the mushrooms, anise, that tends to be specific to the vineyard, which again adds that complexity of like, okay, this is a sense of place. This is why this wine tastes like this. Like Pommard tends to have more mushroom characteristic, but Volnay tends to have more anise kind of thing. And then the vineyards obviously provide the tannins, as well as some of the winemaking, right? So where you grow Pinot Noir, and then you have the winemaking characteristics that add character too. So things like stems, which are going to add some tannins to the wine, oak, which is going to add baking spice, chocolate, and vanilla. So at that point, what I'm going to do is I'm going to check our question box here. So give me a sec and I'll see if we've got some stuff that came through. So we had a question here that says, is American oak ever used to make Pinot Noir? And so I would say that, one thing that you have to be thoughtful about Pinot Noir is that it's very it's very delicate, and so American oak is getting better and better and better, but it tends to have a dill flavor and a little bit more aggressive tannins. So we talked about Pinot Noir having tannins, but they're usually delicate, dense tannins that are very silky. And we're going to taste a couple wines today that have exactly that. And so if you used American oak on Pinot Noir, you could end up dominating the flavor with the oak. And so you want to be really careful that you don't do that. And so typically it's not in there as a a style there, that you would use. Usually we're going to see one wine that has Hungarian oak today that's pretty interesting from that perspective. Okay. Hungarian and French, but no American oak. Let's see if there were any other questions. Okay, so far no other questions. So we're going to go ahead and taste the wines. On to the wines. That beautiful tasting and Marsanne, which is close to the vineyard that's behind me, which is in Pommard. So again, what we need to talk about is these wines we're going to taste, and I'm going to go through some of these regions that are important for Pinot, and Burgundy is the birthplace of Pinot Noir. So back in the 1300s, Burgundy was identified as one of the key places to basically grow grapes anywhere. And there was a kind of a debate between whether they should grow Gamay Noir, which is a grape varietal that's similar to Pinot Noir, more prolific, not as delicate, and then Pinot Noir itself. And Pinot Noir won out. In fact, so much so that the Duke that was in charge of the region of Burgundy at the time outlawed Gamay. Of course, it's still there. It's actually in Beaujolais, right? But so it's kind of that all the way back in the long history of the monks making Pinot Noir in Burgundy. And so really that's where all the propagation of Burgundy came from and why people love it. We really got to talk about this region if you're talking about Burgundy, and there's no better place to start, especially because the wine's a little bit more restrained. So we'll start with them anyway. I would say, obviously it's a classification system. So when we say, there's village wines, well, actually there's just general Burgundian wines, and there's village wines, then there's, Premier Crus and Grand Crus. So there's a whole piece to this. So a couple of other questions and then actually this is a good question to kind of talk about through Burgundy is, are there general differences between New World and Old World? And so most of the New World wines are going to be more fruit forward because they're generally grown in warmer areas. And the Burgundies tend to be a little more restrained. So let's go ahead and taste this. The first wine, this is the Louis Jadot Pinot Noir Bourgogne. So this is an interesting wine because it's a very, it's very, maybe not, that's maybe going too far, but it's an inexpensive Pinot Noir. It's not $40, $50, $60 a bottle. So, it's produced in the Burgundy region, but it's a general area of Burgundy. It's not specific down to a vineyard or an appellation site. So basically it's less expensive because they can create more, they can grab more vineyard sites and blend them all together, and they don't have to pay big money for, a very expensive vineyard site. So this is a blend of a lot of different regions. What I put in the display here, the map, is most of this wine comes from the Côte Chalonnaise. So if we go back here and we see that the Côte Chalonnaise sits in between the Côte de Beaune and the Côte de Nuits, which is the Côte d'Or, so the really high end, the cream of the crop. And then the Mâconnais and the Côte Chalonnaise are essentially regions that don't have as much respect, should I say, but they're making some absolutely stunning wines, and there's a lot of people moving to these regions because the wines don't cost nearly as much, and you can make the quality almost the same. And so that's where most of this wine comes from. So when we saw that, the Côte Chalonnais, as you can see here, we had, Givry is kind of a major part from where this wine comes from. Mercure, you have Buxy, and then some other outlying areas that don't necessarily have designations, but just kind of work as a Côte Chalonnais. So this wine, if we taste it and you smell this wine, it's got a really nice little aroma of that red cherries. There are some red fruits, raspberries, and then definitely that fruity character. I mean that earthy character that I get, which is that almost that forest floor. Touch of spices, and so you can tell it. And then the fruit, while it's there, it's a very pretty wine. It's not overt, right? And we're going to taste a couple wines. I already tried all of them already. That's the great thing about having my job, right? I can taste a bunch of wine. The fruit's going to be very restrained, and so you're going to see a really good example versus New World, Old World on that fruit characteristic. Also, what I want you to notice, I was thinking it's tannins, acid, fruit, and earth. This wine definitely pairs more towards the earth. And then also, if you feel the tannins and the acid you feel in your cheeks, but you can feel the tannins on your palate. And so there's some tannins in this wine, which is some of that is coming from the Côte Chalonnais, but they do blend a small amount from the Côte d'Or, and those wines tend to be a little bit more tannic. So really nice in that sense from this. I'm super impressed with this wine. For 12, 13, 14 bucks, you get a lot from it, and there's a lot of aromatic complexity. Even though it just says Bourgogne, well, that's great. So let's see. We had a question on what temperature do you ferment Pinot Noir at, and so we're going to taste a couple of these. Probably like this wine, this Pinot Noir. A lot of the Pinot Noir that's made, like say at Jadot, they don't do a lot of fermentation temperature control, but they use oak barrels, big oak barrels, to retain basically the heat dissipates. So I would guess upper 70s, low 80s for this wine. And there's a couple more of these that we're gonna taste today, probably a little bit higher because you can tell the extraction is there. And then this one says, why does Louis Jadot say Pinot Noir? I thought you could only say Burgundy. So good question. So the way this used to work was that the French thought it's a sense of place. You can only name your wine Burgundy. You cannot tell people that it's Pinot Noir or Chardonnay. It's about 10, 12 years ago, they decided, well, everyone's buying wines by varietal. So I need to make sure that I make a wine that's got a varietal on the front, or Americans won't buy it. So or Australians won't buy it, or anyone around the world won't buy it, right? So so they started adding that to there, and I think really it's a balance. It's nice that they're telling everyone it's Pinot Noir, and it's nice they're telling it's Burgundy. So good questions. All right, so let's move on to the next wine. We'll keep ourselves on time here. I know want to get through these wines so you can taste them. So the next wine is the Argyle Willamette Valley Pinot Noir. And so we talked about, we talked about, Old World versus New World. And to me, Oregon is the beautiful kind of Oregon, and I give New Zealand too. We don't have a New Zealand wine here to taste too, but Oregon and New Zealand are like that perfect in between. The wines tend to have a good amount of fruit to them, but they're still cool climates, so earthiness comes out, and so this is a perfect example. It's kind of like the cross. It's the cross between as if you flew from Dijon to to Oregon, and then you went to California, you'd cover off all the different styles of Pinot Noir in one trip. So a really nice little wine. This Argyle, sees mostly stainless and some oak. So this is a good example where somebody's making some wines in stainless steel. They're using, oak staves to kind of round the wine out, so they can make more wine at a good value, low to mid 20s instead of it being $40 a bottle. But what I want you to notice is that in that in the Pinot Noir from Jadot, there were a lot of tannins, or a good amount of, like, you could feel it, kind of the drying on your palate. And this wine is going to be a little bit different, not as much tannins, but the one thing is that there's just as much acidity. So there's definitely that biting. It's not biting is the wrong term, but that kind of bright, fresh acidity makes it a great food pair. And then the other thing too is that you notice there's a little bit more weight on this wine than there was on the Jadot, and that's because there's a little bit higher alcohol. So the alcohol is giving the wine a little bit more weight, because Oregon is warmer than Burgundy. So you get this. I don't remember what the percent alcohol on it is. Like, it says somewhere like 14%, 13.5 maybe. Versus the Jadot was definitely, it says 13% to me. It almost comes off as 12%. So a good example there. The other thing that's really unique to Oregon, or really unique is maybe like overly stating it, but somewhat unique to Oregon is the fresh fruit characteristic with the earthiness, and I really get tobacco leaf is kind of like my marker for Oregon, and this wine definitely it speaks to it. It's one of the reasons I picked it for the tasting. It's a perfect example of, that red cherry and the fresh ripe fruits, but then there's this earthy character, which is definitely that tobacco leaf classic. Kind of get that a little bit in New Zealand, sometimes in Chile, but it's really distinct to Oregon. And then one of the things that, obviously, in the Northwest, if you have the chance to go to Oregon, and this is the WillametteWines.com, you can visit them and learn about all the different vineyards you're going to visit. But the grilled salmon is absolutely stunning up there, and this is a perfect combination with that. All right, so the next wine that we're going to taste is the Chalk Hill Sonoma Coast. So Sonoma Coast, again, one of the kind of premier regions for making Pinot Noir. I'll be perfectly honest, it is really difficult to find value Sonoma Coast Pinot Noir because it's hard to produce. It's highly sought after. The wines get really good scores. And so this was a beautiful wine. This wine was available at a very reasonable price, and so we put it in the tasting. It's one of the few out there that says Sonoma Coast on it. It's under $30, and really Sonoma Coast covers that kind of lightish tealish color. So hopefully you can see my little the pointer here, but you've got this region here between Annapolis and then all the way down to Petaluma, and this Petaluma Gap here down to Carneros. This is the Sonoma Coast. And the difference between the Sonoma Coast and Sonoma County, because there are some Sonoma County Pinot Noirs, is that Sonoma Coast is much cooler. And so generally it's considered a better region than Sonoma County, because Sonoma County includes everything in Sonoma. And so, you're really, when you're looking for Pinot Noir of high quality, you're looking for Sonoma Coast, or you're looking for Russian River or Green Valley or Fort Ross, or, there's a couple of vineyards there. There's Petaluma Gap is just being, designated as a region, and there's some amazing Pinot Noirs that come out of there. And now we've gotten a little warmer now. So if you taste this wine right as we taste this wine, it's definitely warmer than Oregon. It's warmer than Burgundy. But I think the thing that is really kind of stunning about this wine is that it has a fruit ripeness, but it's delicate and elegant, and a lot of that has to do with the fact that they're not over extracting this wine. They're making a very subtle Pinot Noir at a very reasonable price point. So a lot of tremendous complexity of aromas, but not a lot of weight, which is great. It's kind of a a style that harkens back to Old World, as a domestic producer. So really interesting wine. The one thing that's different about this wine, which you get just a touch of it, of course I'm kind of saying that because I have it in my brain that this is made from Hungarian oak, but Hungarian oak tends to have this a little bit more, instead of like chocolate and vanilla, it tends to have a little bit more of the allspice, and definitely you can get that in this wine. you know, they said mocha and vanilla. It's almost like, yeah, it is a chocolate, but it also kind of, you know, showcases that almost, I say sherry-like characteristic that you get out of Hungarian oak. And so a really nice little wine, and not too expensive. So great example of Sonoma Coast. Okay, so that was the Chalk Hill. The second to the last wine, the next wine, is the Nadia Pinot Noir. So this is a California-based Pinot Noir, and it's a blend of different regions. So we're going to get an example. So we're kind of actually moving from, you know, through all these regions, and then this is a blend between the current region or the region we're in before, and then the next region we're going to taste. And so this is a 49% Sonoma, 45% Monterey, and 6% San Luis Obispo County. And you ask, well, why would you blend that together? Well, you see, you know, Monterey can be dark and brooding, and the last one we're going to taste is really there. It's like got that really big brooding character to it. But the and then Sonoma Coast is a little bit lighter in style, so you can blend the two together and get a lot of complexity. So not only you have your clonal complexity, but you have your regional complexity too. So you're seeing a lot of this being done, right? You know, a percentage of Sonoma County, percentage of Monterey County, some San Luis Obispo County. Sometimes you get even up to Mendocino blended in. You know, so that's a kind of a good combination of things. And so this wine, you know, it's 9 months in tank. And barrel, and a small amount of new French oak used. And it's starting to showcase like the blend of if you think about the wine that we tasted before, which was the Chalk Hill, which was a lot of red fruits and delicate and elegant. This wine has that, but then it also has the kind of the depth and the you know, the dark fruits and the density of, you know, Monterey and that kind of the area, which is, you know, San Lucia. So you're getting a lot of, you know, weight to this wine. A great little wine. This is not very expensive. It's below 20 in almost every one of our markets. And the thing that it's great with it is that it has a lot of those you know, those complex aromatics and palate feel for that price, because they're sourcing from different areas where they can get better prices on grapes. It just got 92 points in James Suckling and 90 points in Wine Enthusiast. So, you know, a great little wine for under 20 bucks that showcases kind of the best of all of the areas of Pinot Noir from California. So fun little wine there that we've got. All right. So there's that one. There's the Nadia, and then the last wine is the Belle Glos. So because of the fact that Belle Glos is not a high production, it's basically, we couldn't get it in every single store. We couldn't get the single Belle Glos, right? So we have a number of different types of Belle Glos. So what I have is the Los Alturas. You may have the Clark and Telephone or the Dairyman. The Los Alturas and the is Central Coast. So we're going to talk about that one. But the Clark and Telephone and the Dairyman are very similar wines. I believe the Dairyman is from Russian River. So you've got one that's up in Sonoma. But most of the ones we have are the Los Alturas and the Clark and Telephone. So we're going to talk about those wines. So one of the things to think about when talking about basically the Central Coast in Monterey is that you have these regions that are super cold, and then you have like San Antonio Valley and whatnot, and then you have and Carmel Valley is very cold, and then you get these warmer areas like San Bernabe and San Lucas, and Arroyo Seco is a little bit warmer too. This is the Salinas Valley, right? And then you get to the San Lucia Highlands, which is right in the perfect location. It's absolutely where you want to be. It's got perfect, you know, influence from the ocean, so it gets a nice cool, you know, morning fog. Afternoon, it gets a nice breeze. So it's perfect Pinot Noir. A lot of very famous vineyards here. Obviously, Los Alturas is one of them. You've got Gary's Vineyard, Rosella's, all these, other productions in this region. And so, this is a great example of Belle Glos, of one of these wines that continues to get really high scores from this region, and then they become sought after and then hard to find. So hence we gave you 3 different options here today. And so when you taste this one, you can tell from the group of wines that we've tasted already today. This is definitely a lot bigger wine, right? I have the 17. Really like bold and forward. A lot of dark fruits, more black fruits than. And when I say black fruits, like, I mean, here we're saying raspberry and cranberry. I don't know. That's what the winery said. I would say more that this is more like a blue fruits like the plum and whatnot, and dark cherry. But everyone has their different interpretations, I guess. But there's a tremendous amount of complexity to this wine too, and a lot of that has to do with the fact that this one has 100% in barrel, and it's 60% new French oak. So they're taking grapes that are in a very highly sought after region, a lot of density to them, aromatic complexity of those grapes, good some tannins, and then they're using a lot of new French oak to kind of give the back end flavor, kind of bind the tannins in this wine, and then make the whole the whole thing here. And that's what this kind of wine, hence the reason it's quite a bit more expensive than all the rest of the wines we tasted today. And we figured we'd throw one of these in here because it's very interesting to kind of taste them, how they get to that point. So, this is a great example. And the other 2 wines, that the Clark and Telfel and the Dairyman, are similar. I'd say that the first 4 wines were food wines, and you could drink them with lots of different things. This one screams cheese. So the Roaring Forties Blue is a great example. You could use any type of blue cheese that's not completely overtly powerful, that's going to dominate the wine, would go well. You could try like a brie that was a little bit more aggressive, like I think of a Poisse or whatnot. And then so that's a kind of an example of all these different things you could put with this wine. But I would find, because the density and the power is so high, that it might overpower your typical Pinot pairing, like a salmon or maybe chicken or possibly pork, unless you like really kind of maybe barbecued the pork and used barbecue sauce or something. So. Okay, we got a couple questions, and for some reason they finally just came through. So it's like they all came through at once. So another question was, is Pinot Noir ever blended with other grape varietals? So typically not. Pinot Noir is a grape varietal that's kind of distinctly known for being Pinot Noir, and in Burgundy it's not known for blending, just like I guess Northern Rhone Syrah is not really known for blending either. So you don't typically see that. Now, some of the lower end Pinots, because it's so expensive to produce Pinot, actually have Syrah in them, or other grape varietals are going to add some depth. But the problem too with Pinot is that it tends to show the other varietals because they can be really strong and flavorful. So you have to be careful that you don't essentially power over the Pinot Noir with Syrah. And it's pretty obvious, and consumers all of our customers haven't seemed to be super excited about Pinot blends. There is a Coteau Bourgogne, which is actually a blend of Gamay and Pinot Noir. So if you're you're buying a French wine and you see that, it's a good way to get some value Pinot Noir that tastes good, because Gamay is one of the few that actually blends well with Pinot Noir. Okay. There's a question about this Belle Glos. Why is there wax on the Belle Glos? And it's just a stylistic preference. It doesn't really affect the wine quality. It doesn't affect the taste, but it does look really pretty. So, and they've done a nice job with it. And it's nice that they put the pull tab in there, because a lot of these don't have it, and then it's really hard to get the wax off. So I think they've done a nice job there. The question was punch down by hand mean versus say pump over. So punch down. So by hand, I guess it doesn't have to be by hand. That they can automate the punch downs, but usually it's done by hand. So when you have a tank and it's filled with grapes, the grapes float to the top, and so you have to get the grapes. Somehow you have to get them into solution. Is the way into the actual juice, right? Otherwise, what happens is the grapes just sit on the top, and then the wine ferments on the bottom, and then you get something that have any color to it or flavor because you haven't mixed the grape skins, which is what's giving the flavor. So what typically happens and what they do is they use a punch down. Either they use a stick to punch things down, or there's automated systems where you punch the cap down and you submerge the cap, and you have to do that every 5 to 10 hours or so to get that flavor to really extract, to get the Pinot to taste how it should taste. But it's less aggressive than actually pumping the wine over, because the other option would be to take the wine from the bottom of the tank and pump it over the top. And that you would think would be lighter, but for whatever reason, as that wine flows through the cap, it extracts more tannins. So that's why typically Pinot, because you don't want to extract a ton of tannins in Pinot, you would punch down instead of pumping over. Okay. How does the year influence the taste? How would different vintages have made a difference? Okay, so that is a great question and one that I could spend literally hours on. We only have 10 minutes left, so I'll try to be brief. Basically, the vintage is really what it influences is the kind of extraction of fruit or not, right? If it's a warm vintage, you're going to get more alcohol and you're going to get riper fruit, and if it's a cooler vintage, you're going to get less alcohol and not as ripe fruit. So you most of the time what you want is you want something in between, because if the vintage is too warm, then the grapes get they get ripe too quickly before they're able to develop complexity, and then you get a wine with a lot of alcohol and maybe not the complexity you want. But if it's not warm enough, then you end up with a wine that's basically not ripe, and nobody wants to drink unripe wine, as we all know. So that's really how it varies. The regions like California are super consistent. So we very rarely blind taste vintages in California and go, oh, that's this vintage or this vintage. Really they're pretty similar, but vintage is key in Burgundy. So you can actually, a lot of the tests, actually the master wine exam, a lot of it is about identifying vintage in Burgundy and tasting the wine going, okay, well, that was 16 or 17 or 18 or whatever. So, you have vintages like 17 and 18 which were very ripe and forward, but not a lot of tannins to the wine. So you can identify that year as like, okay, well, it's 17 or 18 and maybe it's a little bit less fruity. So I'm going to go with 18 versus 17, which was a very fruit forward vintage. Versus 16, which was a cooler vintage, had a good amount of warmth. In fact, 16 was a perfect vintage for red Burgundy, even though there was very little crop due to some, frost issues or whatnot, where you got this like perfect weather across the board. The wines got just ripe enough, and then they had this beautiful tannins, and their alcohol was lower, and the wines are going to age for 10, 15, 20 years at least. So that hopefully gives you an idea about vintage. I would really only worry about it in Burgundy, maybe in places like cool areas like Central Otago, New Zealand, Oregon. Sometimes you have to worry about the vintage, and in Oregon, sometimes the vintage, you just need to be careful with the really rainy vintages, which we haven't had one since 13. So and 11, which was a very cool vintage. So Oregon, pretty consistent last bunch of years, but every once in a while you'll get a very rainy vintage, and it's not like the wines aren't good, it's just you got to stick with the producers that know how to make wines when it rains, because honestly there's some people that know how to do it, and there's some folks that are just learning. So that can be the challenge. And then the last question that I got is, we talked about this one between New World and Old World Pinot. Or actually, there's two more last ones. So we talked about New World versus Old. So today, hopefully, you tasted the Jadot, and you tasted the Argyle, and now you kind of go, okay, I got a good concept of what that is, and then I went to the California wines, and the Belle Glos is all the way to the extreme, right? That's one of the ripest Pinots you're going to get. But I think it shows a good example of those wines and how they vary. The last question I think we'll answer before we call it quits today. Can you please describe the difference in wine glasses, Cab versus Pinot Noir? So the wine glass I have today is actually a Sauvignon Blanc glass of all things. These are my tasting glasses. I always taste out of the same glasses, so I get consistency. The difference between Pinot Noir and Cabernet glasses is that Pinot Noir tends to be a little bit whiter on the base, and actually sometimes very white on the base. And why are we doing that with Pinot Noir? Well, it tends to be more delicate grape varietal. And what you're trying to do is get the aromatic complexity out of the wine, because it might not be completely obvious if it sits in a glass that is a little bit more angular. And then this one versus Cabernet, which tends to have higher alcohol and more aromatics. So you don't need to emphasize the aromatics. In fact, sometimes drinking Cabernet out of a Pinot Noir glass can make the Cabernet taste singular. A couple of times I didn't have a glass choice. It's like, all I have is Pinot Noir glass, take a Pinot Noir glass, and then, oh, wow, that's Cabernet doesn't taste like anything. It's a $75 Cabernet. I realized, well, it's because it's just emphasized too much. Like the fruits are so dominant. And so, you have to be careful with that. So that's a great question. And maybe the last question that we'll answer is, do you like La Tâche? La Tâche is made by Domini Romani Conti, DRC, and they're a very famous producer of basically the most famous producer of Burgundy. I'm sure I like La Tâche. I think I've only had it once in my life, so it was an amazing experience. It was a very old wine. Somebody had 1961, absolutely stunning wine. But I've only tasted it once, so I can't tell you. I guess I really like it. The problem is the wine sell for like $2,500 a bottle. So it just happened that somebody was really nice and opened up one that they had kept in their cellar for a very long time because it was a special event. But typically I don't drink that. So more often I drink your just classic Sonoma Coast Pinot Noir. There's a lot of great ones out there. And there's a lot of great Burgundy that's, $40, $50, a special Saturday evening kind of thing. That's out there. So, that's the type of thing that I like to drink from Pinot Noir. And it is one of my favorite grape varietals because my wife really likes it. So you got to go with what your spouse drinks too, right? So, all right. So I think we're just about out of time. I got through the questions, and we asked a lot of great questions. These are the footnotes, I guess to put it that way. But these are great things that you can kind of look up on your own. That if you want to learn more about Pinot Noir, if you've heard, we just partnered with the Napa Valley Wine Academy at Albertsons, and we're helping to train a lot of our beverage stewards. But the Napa Valley Wine Academy is a great opportunity for guests that come into our stores to have an opportunity to learn more about wine. And then also on our links, our websites are Randall's, Tom Thumb, Acme, Jewel Osco, United, Albertsons, Safeway. We have a lot of different links there too. We're going to be building a lot of education on our website, so that will include these. And then eventually, but this link will also be posted on YouTube, so you can access it on YouTube if you want. If you want to learn more, if you want to rewatch something because you didn't catch it the first time, it'll be there. All right. And that's what we'll call it a day here. Enjoy the wines that you all have open, and have a great rest of your week/weekend.